She stood barefoot in the snow, her breath forming clouds of shame in the bitter Montana air. Behind her, the wagon creaked as her father slammed his fist against the wooden side. "Time to meet your new owner," he barked, as if she were a cow at auction. Clara Dawson didn't cry. Not anymore. Tears had long frozen inside her, just like the dreams of a home, a child, a hand that wouldn't strike. She tightened her grip on the frayed cloth sack that held everything she owned, and waited to be sold to the highest bidder. The trading post was bustling with voices sharp, laughing, cruel. Men leaned against barrels, chewing tobacco, spitting into the dirt, and talking about her like she wasn't there. "Healthy frame," one said, "but word is she's barren. Useless for breeding." Another scoffed, "Might as well buy a mule, at least it can haul wood." Clara felt her cheeks sting, not from the wind, but from the shame. She pressed her eye to a crack in the canvas and counted the boots in the snow. 12, 13, 14 men, all of them staring at her like she was a broken tool someone had left behind in the shed too long. Except one. He stood a little further back, not laughing, not spitting, just watching with eyes the color of storm clouds and a frown etched into his sun-weathered face. He wore a dark wool coat, though the hem was worn. His hands were rough like the other men's, but clean. He looked like he'd worked hard for everything he had and expected others to do the same. Not cruel, just tired. "What's her name?" the man asked. Clara's father, James Dawson, paused as if the question offended him. "Name's Clara, Clara Dawson. But hell, she'll answer to whatever you call her. Won't matter." "It matters to me," the man said flatly. For a second, just 1 second, Clara felt something flicker in her chest. Someone had asked for her name. Not the girl, not the burden, not wife. "Just Clara. Can she speak?" the man continued. "Too much, if you ask me." James sneered. "Always reading, asking questions. That's probably why her body won't do what it's supposed to." Broke from the inside out. There was a long pause. Then the man stepped forward. "Miss Clara, would you mind stepping out here for a moment?" "Please." He said, "Please." The word echoed in her head like a hymn. Clara hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, she pushed back the canvas and stepped into the cold light of the afternoon. The sun hit her face and she winced. Her bare feet crunched on icy gravel. Her dress, patched 3 times over, whipped in the mountain wind. The men stared, some with pity, some with hunger. 1 or 2 turned away, disappointed she wasn't more beautiful. But the man who had spoken didn't smile or leer. He looked at her the way someone looks at a wounded animal, softly, with a kind of reverence. "My name is Elias Whitmore," he said, offering no handshake, no show of ownership, just his name. Like an invitation. "I have 5 children. I lost my wife 2 years ago. I need help on my farm cooking, cleaning, tending the little ones. Would you be willing to come work for us?" Clara blinked. Work for us. Not be owned. Not be claimed. But asked. She looked at her father, whose face had turned sour, looked at the other men, still whispering and chuckling. Then she looked back at Elias Whitmore and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Respect. "Yes," she said, her voice no louder than a prayer. "I'd be willing." Elias nodded. He didn't bargain. Didn't haggle like the others. He reached into his coat and pulled out $80 more than Clara had ever seen in one place. James Dawson snatched it without a word. Elias turned to Clara. "Do you have everything you need from the wagon?" She held up her sack. "This is all I have." His jaw tightened. "Then it's not enough." Without another word, he shrugged off his own wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke and pine. Clara flinched. He didn't touch her skin, didn't pull her close. He simply covered her. "Let's go home," he said. Home. The word felt impossible, but Clara walked toward his wagon anyway. Behind her, her father's voice rang out like a curse. "She's your problem now. Whitmore, don't come crying to me when she disappoints you." Clara didn't look back. Not this time. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled down the frozen dirt road, past groves of pine and patches of brittle grass trying to survive the Montana wind. Clara sat as far from Elias as she could on the bench seat, the borrowed coat wrapped tight around her shoulders like armor. Her small sack rested in her lap, the contents rattling slightly 2 hairpins, a leather-bound prayer book with torn pages, and a locket with no picture inside. She hadn't said a word since they'd left the trading post. Neither had he, but the silence between them didn't feel dangerous. It felt like breathing room. "Tell me about your children," Clara said, surprising even herself. Elias glanced sideways, as if unsure whether to be pleased or cautious. "Henry's the oldest, 17. Thinks he's the man of the house since his mama passed. Works hard. Keeps too much to himself." Clara nodded. She knew that kind of boy. She had once been the girl version of him. Maggie's 13. Fierce and smart. Tries to carry too much weight for someone her size. She thinks she's protecting the little ones, but I worry she's forgetting how to be a kid. Clara smiled slightly. "Sounds like someone I'd like." Elias tilted his head in agreement. "The twins, Noah and Nora, are 10. Always running, always shouting. He's quiet with animals. She reads anything she can get her hands on." "And then there's Lily." His voice faltered, and something shifted behind his eyes. She just turned 6. Barely remembers her mother, but she remembers the silence that came after. Clara turned to look out at the horizon. "They sound like good children." "They are," Elias said softly, "but they need more than I can give. They need warmth, a rhythm, someone who sees them." Clara's heart tugged, a fragile thread pulled taut. "I'll try," she said. "I don't know if I'll be enough, but I'll try." He didn't say anything more, but his grip on the reins relaxed. The farmhouse appeared like a mirage after the long drive, whitewashed wood, worn gray from storms, a stone chimney slanting slightly to the left, and a porch missing one rail. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, promising fire inside. But it was the windows that made Clara pause. There were 5 of them, and behind each one she could see movement, tiny silhouettes peeking through curtains, eyes wide with questions they didn't yet know how to ask. As Elias helped her down, the front door creaked open. Henry stepped out first, tall and thin, his jaw set like someone who had learned too early not to trust the future. He nodded once to Clara, guarded but polite. Maggie followed, her apron streaked with flour. She stared at Clara with suspicion sharp enough to cut fabric. Noah and Nora pushed through next, elbowing each other in competition for the better view. They whispered something Clara couldn't hear, then burst into muffled giggles. And finally, Lily. She stepped quietly behind the others, her thumb in her mouth, dragging a torn rag doll by the arm. Her blonde curls were tangled, her dress too short at the wrists, but her eyes were full of aching, hopeful need. "Children," Elias said gently, "this is Miss Clara. She'll be helping us around the house." Maggie crossed her arms. "She gonna sleep in Mama's room?" Elias paused. "That's not decided yet. She'll take the spare bed in the attic for now." Henry stepped forward and took Clara's sack without being asked. He didn't smile, but he didn't turn away either. It felt like something inside. The house smelled of smoke, unwashed laundry, and faintly of cinnamon. Dishes were stacked high beside the sink. A basket of clothes overflowed in the corner. The hearth burned, but the warmth hadn't reached the walls. The home wasn't unloved, it was just tired, like its people. Maggie watched Clara's every move as she took off her shoes and folded the coat. "Do you know how to cook stew?" she asked, almost like a challenge. "I do," Clara replied calmly. "I also know how to fix a torn hem, remove splinters, braid hair, and tell bedtime stories that don't end in death." Noah's eyes lit up, real ones with monsters. Sometimes Clara smiled, but the kind of monsters you can beat. That night, Clara didn't sleep much. The attic was drafty. Wind whistled through a cracked pane. The bed creaked every time she turned. But it wasn't the cold that kept her awake. It was the fear. Not of danger, but of disappointment. She had been welcomed into a house that didn't know her yet. And tomorrow, She'd have to earn every inch of that roof above her head. Downstairs, someone coughed. A floorboard creaked. A child cried out in sleep. And Clara, clutching the edge of the thin quilt, whispered to the dark, "Please, let them see I can be more than what the world says I'm not." The first snow came quietly, like a whispered warning. By the time Clara woke the next morning, the world outside had turned white. The sky sagged low, heavy with clouds, and flurries danced past the attic window like a swarm of soft-winged moths. She dressed in silence, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of a house that still didn't fully trust her. Her fingers were stiff with cold, and the hem of her dress brushed against the rough wood floor with each step. When she reached the kitchen, the children were already gathered, faces lit only by the orange flicker of the fireplace. Elias stood by the window, his jaw tight. "It's coming fast," he said. "I need to get the livestock sheltered before it worsens. Clara, stay with the children." She nodded. There was no time for pleasantries, not in the face of a mountain storm. By noon, the wind howled like wolves at the door, rattling the shutters and turning the glass panes into pale frost paintings. Snow buried the porch, then the windowsills, then the bottom half of the barn beyond the kitchen view. They were locked in, and it was Clara's job to make sure the house didn't fracture from the inside out. The first day was tense. The children barely spoke to her. Henry took to pacing like a caged animal, muttering about firewood. Maggie sat near the fireplace, sewing with tight, angry stitches. The twins fought over a book neither seemed to want to read. Lily curled in the corner, rocking her torn doll and whispering lullabies only she could hear. Clara knew that silence. She had lived in it before, so she filled it. She began in the smallest of ways, lighting extra candles to make the room warmer, humming as she swept the hearth, telling stories as she peeled potatoes. At first, they ignored her. Then, they listened. Then, they laughed. By the second night, the house felt a little less hollow. On the third morning, she found Maggie trying to make cornbread, but burning it in the cast-iron skillet. "Too hot," Clara said gently, taking the pan. "You need to turn it before the edges blacken." Maggie looked like she wanted to argue. But then, instead, she nodded and asked, "Can I try again?" They cooked side by side, not quite friends, but something warmer than indifference flickered between them. The storm didn't let up. Day 4 brought cabin fever like an unwelcome guest. The children grew restless. Voices rose. Tempers flared. When Henry slammed the kitchen door hard enough to rattle the walls, Clara made a decision. "We're playing a game," she announced. No one responded. "Charades," she said firmly. "Winners get the last slice of pie." That got their attention. At first, they were awkward, too shy, too skeptical. But then Maggie stood up and tried to act out a bear with a stomachache, and Henry cracked a smile for the first time. By nightfall, even Elias joined in, pretending to be a rooster stuck in a fence. The children roared with laughter. Clara watched from the edge of the hearth, her heart swelling with something dangerously close to belonging. The next day, while baking bread with Maggie, a stray handful of flour turned into war. Flour flew through the air like snow, coating their hair and faces in clouds of white. Maggie shrieked, breathless with laughter, as Clara chased her with a spoon. When they finally collapsed against the table, cheeks red and lungs burning, Maggie whispered, "I haven't laughed like that since Mama died." Neither had Clara. It was Lily who cracked her open for good. That night, as the storm rattled the roof and the windows pulsed with icy wind, Lily climbed into Clara's lap without a word. She held out her doll, its stuffing coming loose, one button eye hanging by a thread. "Can you fix her?" the little girl whispered. Clara took the doll gently, nodding. "Of course." Lily stared at her with those wide, wounded eyes. "Mama used to fix things. Then she got broken, and nobody could fix her." Clara's throat tightened. She stitched in silence, her fingers trembling. "Sometimes broken things can't go back to how they were," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean they can't be whole in a new way." Lily studied the doll's scarred fabric. "Are you broken too?" Clara didn't lie. Yes, she said, but I'm learning how to stitch the pieces back together. Lily nodded solemnly. I'm glad you're broken like us. Means you know how to help. And Clara, who had been discarded, discounted, and disbelieved, felt something inside her settle into place. She was needed. She was home. By the time the storm broke on the 7th day, the snowdrifts were shoulder high, but the tension in the house had melted like frost on warm glass. The twins called her Miss Clara with affection. Henry began asking her opinion before chopping wood. Maggie shared stories about her mother and sometimes asked for Clara's help without biting sarcasm. And Lily never left her side. The snow had barely melted when the knock came. It wasn't a gentle tap or hesitant rap. It was the sharp, decisive pounding of someone who believed they had every right to interrupt. Clara was out back, hanging linens to dry in the shy spring sun. The wind lifted the damp sheets like sails, and for a moment she let herself pretend she was on a ship, far from the mountains and the memories. But then she heard the voice sharp, nasal, and laced with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Whitmore," the voice called. "We need to talk. Now." Clara peeked through the sheets, her breath catching. A gray mare stood in the yard, and beside it, stiff as a pine post, sat Mrs. Edna Kingsley, widow of the old mayor, self-appointed guardian of Cedar Hollow's moral spine. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his shoulders already bracing. "Good morning, Edna," he said politely. "What brings you out this way?" "You know what brings me," she snapped, dismounting with surprising speed for someone who claimed arthritis on Sundays. "It's the talk in town, the unmarried woman living under your roof, the influence she's having on your children." Clara froze, hands clenched on the clothespins. Inside the house, Maggie was teaching the twins their letters. Henry was sharpening tools by the barn. Lily was chasing a moth with her doll tucked in one arm. They all heard the tone. They all understood. Clara began pulling sheets from the line, her heart thudding. Maybe it was time. Maybe she'd stayed too long, built too much, dared to hope too hard. Mrs. Kingsley's voice rose. "You are a widower, Mr. Whitmore. You have 5 impressionable children, and you've taken in a woman with no legal standing, no ring, no vows, no decency. Do you understand what that looks like to the rest of us?" Elias's voice stayed steady. "It looks like someone who needed help, and someone who helped us in return." Clara gathered the linens quickly, eyes stinging. She didn't want to cause more harm, not to this house, not to these children. But just as she turned to retreat inside, a flash of movement caught her eye. Lily barreled toward her, waving a small slate. "Miss Clara, look what I wrote." The child's letters wobbled across the board, crooked but proud. Mrs. Kingsley turned on the child, her lips thinning. "And what kind of woman teaches your children without being their mother?" Before Clara could answer, a new voice cut through the wind. "A good one," said Henry. He stood on the porch, tall and still, his face unreadable. "Miss Clara taught Lily her letters. She taught Maggie how to make tea for fevers. She keeps the house warm. She reads us stories. She climbed a tree to save Lily when she was stuck." Mrs. Kingsley frowned. "Young man, you have no idea what's appropriate. I know what home feels like," Maggie said, stepping out behind him, arms crossed. "And it didn't feel like this before she came." Noah and Nora appeared next, standing shoulder to shoulder. "She taught us how to make candles," Nora said. "And how to clean the barn without arguing," added Noah. Clara couldn't breathe. These were not children anymore. They were her army. Mrs. Kingsley turned to Elias, her voice now laced with cold threat. "There are rules. Elias, proper behavior. Either you marry her or she leaves. This arrangement cannot continue." The word marry hit like a stone in a still pond. Clara's cheeks flushed. She barely knew Elias beyond these months of shared struggle and kindness. He had saved her. Yes, but marriage. That wasn't the plan. That wasn't even a conversation. "I will not have my children's reputation tarnished," Mrs. Kingsley declared. "You have until Sunday to make this right, or the pastor and every decent family in this valley will know where we stand." She turned on her heel and mounted her horse in one swift motion, disappearing down the path in a swirl of disapproval. The silence she left behind was deafening. Clara looked at Elias, eyes wide, apology already forming. "I can leave tonight, if I have to." "I never meant to." "You're not leaving," Henry said firmly. Maggie stepped closer. "We'll tell everyone she's our teacher. Or our aunt. Or that we don't care what they think." "But the town does," Clara whispered. "They can hurt you." Is it worth that Elias looked at his children lined up in defense, rooted in something deeper than protection? "Yes," he said, simply. "It is." That evening, after supper was cleared and the children tucked into bed, Clara sat on the porch alone. The wind had changed again, cooler, sharper, the kind of wind that brings new seasons, new battles. Elias joined her quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "They're ready to fight for you," he said. Clara wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic. "They shouldn't have to." "Sometimes," he said, "love isn't quiet. Sometimes it has to stand up and speak." She didn't answer, but she leaned into him, and, for the first time, she didn't feel like a guest on borrowed time. She felt claimed, not like property, but like family. It was a golden morning. Spring had finally broken through the grip of winter, and the mountains surrounding the Whitmore homestead glowed green with new life. Clara was in the yard with Lily, planting lavender shoots in a row behind the chicken coop. The little girl chattered endlessly about butterflies, broken dolls, and the names she'd given every hen in the coop. For once, the day felt simple. Then Clara heard it, the sound of hooves. 2 horses, moving with a purpose that chilled her blood. She stood, wiping dirt from her palms just as the riders appeared on the ridge. One sat slumped and sour, shoulders hunched like a threat. The other sat tall and straight, his suit black, hat sharp. Clara's breath caught as recognition sliced through her. James Dawson, her father, and next to him, Walter Blackwell, her ex-husband, the man who'd once claimed her, then discarded her like broken china. They came down the path like a storm, trailing dust and silence behind them. "Clara," James barked, dismounting. "Time to come home. This foolishness ends now." The children heard. Clara saw Henry reach for the rifle by the door. Maggie rushed to gather the twins. Lily slipped her small hand into Clara's. Walter swung down from his saddle, brushing dust from his black coat with deliberate disdain. His voice was flat, cold, and practiced. "I've come to retrieve what's mine." Clara didn't move. "She doesn't belong to anybody." Henry called from the porch, voice shaky but loud. Walter chuckled, cruel and cutting. "Boy, adults are talking, and law is on my side." He pulled a folded document from his coat and waved it like a banner. "Signed and witnessed in Kansas. This woman is still my wife in the eyes of God and man." Elias appeared from the barn, face unreadable, but body taut like a wire. "You're on my land," he said evenly. "State your business, and do it quick." "I'm taking my wife back," Walter said. "She left without cause. Now I'm being generous and offering to take her in again." Clara laughed. It came out brittle and bitter, the sound of a woman finally tired of fear. "Generous," she repeated. "You divorced me. You told the whole town I was useless, barren, a waste of a good man's time." Walter's eyes narrowed. "Things change." "No," Clara said. "They don't. You didn't come here because you missed me. You came because whatever woman you tried next didn't work out, and now you want someone to scrub your boots again." James stepped forward. "You listen to your husband, girl, and your father." "I am listening," Clara said, voice rising. "And I don't hear a single word that sounds like love." She turned to Elias, to the porch where the children stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide with fear and fire. "Do you know what I've learned since I got here?" she said, voice shaking. "That I can be a mother without ever giving birth. That I can build a family through care, through stories, through showing up every single day." "She's our mama now," Maggie said fiercely, stepping down from the porch. Walter's face flushed dark. "Children should be seen and not heard." "Then you'll never hear the truth," Henry said, raising the rifle, not aiming it, but holding it with clear intention. James sputtered. You raised them to threaten their elders. Elias finally stepped forward, slow and steady. These children know what it means to protect someone who protects them. Clara has been that person. Walter waved the document again. You can play house all you like, but the law's clear. She's still mine. Clara stepped in front of him, close enough to see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the one he'd gotten the night he'd thrown a bottle at the wall, inches from her head. You don't own me, she said. Not anymore. Not ever again. Walter's lip curled. You think anyone else will have you. You think a man like him wants a woman like you. I already have her, Elias said quietly. And she isn't mine. She's herself. That's the only way I'll ever want her. There was silence. Real silence. Then Lily darted forward and wrapped her arms around Clara's leg. Don't go, she whispered. You fix everything. Clara bent down, scooped the child up, and turned back to the men who represented everything she had survived. I'm not going anywhere, she said. This is my home now. These are my children. You can keep your paper, your titles, and your shame. I choose this family, and they choose me. James looked at Walter, expecting some grand rebuttal, but the younger man's bravado had wilted. He folded the paper slowly and stuffed it back into his coat. This isn't over, he muttered. Elias stepped beside Clara, hand resting casually on his belt, where the knife stayed hidden but ready. Yes, he said, it is. Clara didn't watch them right away. She stood in the doorway with her children and the man who had given her choice. And for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never dared to believe was hers. Freedom. It happened in a blink. One moment Clara was gathering eggs in her apron, humming softly as the chickens clucked at her feet. The next, a scream. High-pitched, jagged, slicing through the calm like shattered glass. Lily. The name tore from Clara's throat before she even knew what had happened. She dropped the apron, eggs spilling and cracking in the dirt, and ran barefoot toward the sound. The barn loomed ahead, its shadow long in the morning light. Lily lay crumpled at the bottom of the loft ladder, her small body twisted, one arm bent at an angle no arm should ever bend. A dark stain spread slowly beneath her head, soaking into the hay like ink on paper. Henry stood frozen in the doorway, pale as snow. Maggie clutched the twins behind her, trying to shield their eyes, but her own face was sheet white with fear. Get your father, Clara shouted. Now she dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she checked Lily's chest, breathing but shallow, bleeding but not gushing, alive but broken. Clara's mouth went dry. Her ears rang. She could hear the blood in her own veins, the beat of her heart pounding like hooves across a wooden floor. Elias arrived moments later, skidding into the barn, eyes wide with panic. How bad, he asked, voice shaking. Broken arm, Clara replied, her voice shockingly steady. And she hit her head. But she's breathing, for now. I'll ride for Dr. Harrison, Henry said, already grabbing the saddle. He's in Denver. Gone until next week, Elias said hoarsely. Clara's mind whirled. Denver, 3 days' ride. Through passes still half-iced and dangerous. Lily didn't have 3 days. Clara looked down at the child in her lap, pale cheeks. Blood-matted curls. That little mouth that called her Mama Clara. Then she looked up at Elias. I can set it, she said quietly. He blinked. What my mother taught me. Years ago. We lived so far from town. Doctors weren't an option. I've done it before. Just never on someone this small. If you're wrong, his voice broke. If we wait, Clara said, she may lose the arm. Or worse. Maggie stepped forward, her face streaked with tears. I'll help, she said. Tell me what to do. Clara swallowed hard. Boil water. Lots of it. Bring clean cloth, the thickest you have. We'll need splints straight wood, about this long. She held out her hands. Now go. Hurry. Within minutes, the barn had transformed. Ben and Nora gathered kindling for a fire. Henry fetched spare timber from the tool shed. Maggie and Clara tore old linens into strips and soaked them in hot water. And Elias, who had seen men bleed on battlefields, stood helpless, Clutching the barn post like it might hold up the world, Clara worked fast. She cleaned the wound, found the break, steadied herself. "Hold her tight," she said, nodding to Maggie and Elias. Then she pulled. Lily screamed a sound that pierced bone and soul, but Clara didn't stop. She aligned the bones, splinted the arm, wrapped it firm but not tight. Then she sat back, covered in blood and sweat, and wept silently. Not from fear, from relief. That night, Lily woke, her eyes fluttered open, groggy and confused. "What happened to me?" she asked. Clara sat beside her, brushing curls from her face. "You fell, baby girl, but you're safe now. I fixed your arm." Lily blinked, "Like you fixed my doll." Clara nodded, "Exactly like that." Lily was quiet a long moment, then whispered, "I'm glad you know how to fix broken things." Elias stood in the doorway of the small room, watching mother and daughter. When Clara joined him later on the porch, her hands still trembling, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. She could have died. She said finally, "If I'd done it wrong, but you didn't." Elias said, "You saved her." I was terrified. That's what makes it brave. She leaned against him, tears drying on her cheeks, the weight of the day finally catching up. "You were what we needed," Elias said softly, "exactly when we needed it." The next morning, the kitchen smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Lily sat at the table, her arm in a sling, bossing Maggie around about how pancakes were supposed to be flipped. The twins giggled. Henry leaned back in his chair, less a boy and more a man who had seen his family spared by inches. And Clara. She sat with her hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the people she had chosen and who, astonishingly, had chosen her back. She no longer wondered if she was enough. She knew she was. Not because of what she could give, but because of who she had become. A protector, a healer, a mother. Sunday came with blue skies and golden light spilling through the kitchen window. Outside, the hills had turned soft green, dotted with wildflowers Clara didn't yet know the names of. The storm was gone. The child had healed. The family was whole. But Clara's heart beat like thunder, because today they were going to town, to church, to stand, shoulder to shoulder, under the eyes of every whispering neighbor. She hadn't stepped inside a church since her wedding day, since Walter Blackwell had placed a ring on her finger with a hand that would later bruise her cheek. Now she would walk in, not as a wife, not as a guest, but as a woman beside Elias Whitmore and the 5 children who had made her their own. She wore her best dress still patched, but clean. Maggie had helped braid her hair. Nora gave her a ribbon for her wrist. Lily tucked a flower behind her ear. "You look like you belong to the sun," Lily whispered, eyes wide with admiration. Clara tried to smile, but her stomach twisted. What if the town turned their backs? What if the pews shifted away? What if they walked in and found only silence? Elias must have sensed her worry. As he helped her into the wagon, he leaned close and said, "We can turn the horse around, drive right past the steeple, take the kids to the lake, make a memory instead of a statement." Clara shook her head. "No, we go. Then we go together," he said, "and we don't flinch." They arrived just as the first bell rang. People turned. Clara felt their stares, saw the way conversations paused, how eyes swept over her like they were deciding whether to see her or forget her again. The children formed a protective ring around her, Henry on one side, Maggie on the other, and Lily in front like a flower girl leading the way. Elias walked beside Clara, his hand resting gently near the small of her back. Not possessive, just present. Inside, the sanctuary was warm with morning light. Wooden pews, tall windows, the scent of wax and old cedar. She could almost hear the breath of the building holding itself in. They sat together on the 3rd row, 6 children, 1 woman, 1 man, a unit that wasn't blood but felt more binding than bone. Reverend Alden Matthews stepped to the pulpit, a gentle man with kind eyes and a voice like slow thunder. He cleared his throat, scanned the crowd, and began. "Today I want to talk about Ruth." Clara flinched. Ruth, the Reverend continued, was not from the right family. not from the chosen bloodline. And when her husband died, she had every right to return to what was safe, what was familiar. But she didn't. His voice softened. She said to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people." A hush fell over the room. Clara felt Maggie's fingers slide into hers. Ruth built her family by choice, the Reverend said, and God blessed her for it. When the service ended, the churchyard buzzed with conversation, but no one moved toward them. Clara stood still, unsure whether to smile, speak, or disappear. Then Margaret Patterson crossed the yard. She was the wife of the mill owner, the closest thing Cedar Hollow had to royalty, and she walked straight toward Clara. "Miss Dawson," she said. Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then Margaret did something that broke the tension like morning sunlight through fog. She smiled. "I just wanted to say, I've seen those children around town," she said. "They've grown, happy, bright, and I believe we all know whose hands have shaped that change." Behind her, a small group of women nodded the schoolteacher, the doctor's wife, the widow who ran the store. "We've been watching," Margaret said, gently, "and we just wanted to tell you you're welcome here." Clara's knees nearly gave out. The schoolteacher stepped forward. "Maggie's reading is years ahead now. Henry's helping the younger boys in class. And Lily, well, Lily never stops talking about her Mama Clara." Clara felt something bloom in her chest, warm, unexpected, and deeply real. Not tolerance, not pity, belonging. Elias stepped closer, slipping his fingers through hers. Dr. Morrison, the young town doctor, wandered over, tipping his hat. "Mr. Whitmore, I hope you don't mind me saying, your household's never looked healthier or happier." Elias smiled. "I don't mind at all." Across the churchyard, Clara saw two figures in black standing in the shadows, her father and Walter. Their faces were cold stone, but they looked so small now, so distant. Lily tugged Clara's sleeve. "Does this mean everyone likes us now?" Clara knelt, met the little girl's eyes. "It means the people who matter see us clearly," she said, "and the ones who don't can look away." On the ride home, the children chattered like birds, their voices full of light. Maggie leaned on Clara's shoulder. Henry whistled. The twins argued over whether Ruth had really married a king. And Elias, he watched Clara with something new in his gaze, not just affection, but admiration. He had offered her safety. She had brought him sanctuary. As the wagon crested the final hill, their home came into view, blooming garden, patched roof, crooked porch steps, and all. And, for the first time, Clara saw it the way a wife does. Not a shelter, not a mercy, but a life built, chosen, and now publicly affirmed. 6 months later, the garden bloomed like a painting come to life. Lavender, tomatoes, peas climbing the crooked fence, bees danced in the sun. And in the middle of it all, Clara stood barefoot in the dirt, watching a little girl chase butterflies with both arms outstretched, both arms, whole and strong. "Look, Mama Clara, Mama." Lily called, her laughter echoing over the hills. "Look what I caught, a handful of wild flowers, crumpled but beautiful, offered with pride." Clara knelt to receive them. "They're perfect," she whispered, kissing Lily's forehead. "Just like you." Every time Lily called her Mama Clara, her heart ached in the sweetest way, not because she had birthed this child, but because she had chosen to love her into safety. And Lily had chosen her right back. Elias appeared at the garden gate, holding an envelope. Clara stood. "Is that?" He nodded, grinning. "Territorial Land Office. It's time." The children gathered like birds sensing something big. Clara's hands shook as she opened the letter. Her eyes skimmed the words, then widened. "We got it," she breathed. "All 160 acres. It's ours." Lily squealed. Nora screamed. Ben danced in a circle. Maggie cried. Henry clapped Elias on the back like a man. And Clara laughed. She laughed so hard she dropped to her knees in the dirt, tears and joy streaming down her face, not because of the paper, but because this moment meant no one could ever take any of it away again. They belonged, officially, eternally. That night, Elias stood at the head of the supper table, clearing his throat in that quiet way that meant he had something important to say. "This land gives us the chance to dream," he said. "And I want each of you to dream loud." He looked to Henry. "If you want to go to Denver for school, we'll find a way." To Maggie, "You deserve to be 13 again. Maybe learn music or painting." To the twins, "You two already have gifts. We'll help you grow them." Then he turned to Clara, eyes steady and full. "And you, my wife, have given all of us something we didn't know we needed." "What's that?" Clara asked, her voice barely a breath. "Hope," he said. "You reminded us that broken things can still build something beautiful. That love doesn't come from blood. It comes from what we choose to give." "Mama Clara," Lily said, tugging her sleeve, "are we going to live here forever and ever?" Clara looked around the table at this family that had once been strangers, now stitched into her soul. "Yes, sweet one," she said, her voice strong, forever and ever. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep and the stars bloomed in the velvet sky, Clara sat beside Elias on the porch. The wind smelled of pine and fresh earth. The creek sang its quiet song beyond the garden. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten in that wagon?" Clara asked. Elias was quiet a moment. Then, "Sometimes. But I believe everything led you here." She nodded. "Even the worst of it." He looked at her. "Would you ever write your father? Tell him how things turned out?" Clara shook her head gently. "He already told me what I was worth. I just had to learn he was wrong." Elias took her hand in his. "And what are you worth?" "Clara Whitmore." She smiled into the night, thinking of Lily's healed arm, Henry's softened shoulders, Maggie's laughter, the singing kitchen, the garden growing wildly in every direction. "I'm worth exactly what I choose to give," she said. "And I choose to give all of me to this life, to this love, to this forever." The wind that once carried her shame now carried the scent of lavender and joy. And for the first time in her life, Clara knew she was not broken. She was whole. She was home. Sometimes life tries to tell us what we're worth by what we can produce, who we belong to, or how perfect we look on paper. But real worth isn't decided by anyone else. It's what you choose to give, even after you've been discarded, dismissed, or doubted. When you choose love, even in the face of rejection, you reclaim your story. You don't have to be born into a family to be someone's home. You just have to show up and keep showing up with courage, patience, and heart. Clara didn't need to be saved. She just needed to be seen. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or if it made you cry even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in more stories like this about love, healing, and second chances, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Let's keep telling stories that matter, because sometimes they help us find our way home.